Katy Lees here, Principal 340B Compliance Advisor with Virtue 340B. Welcome back to my video series. This is episode 5. I hope that you are enjoying the series, and as I always say, please send me questions, send me topics, any feedback. I've gotten some good feedback, not a ton, but I have gotten some great feedback and I love it. I think all of you know that I am just an avid supporter of the 340B program. That is what I do day after day. Is, in my other role as the director of the 340B program, I just absolutely want to administer a program of integrity. I want to be a good steward of the program, and I want the program to live on to, just protect the safety net providers that it benefits today. I want that to continue. And the key thing that we need to do to ensure that it continues is just be good stewards of the program and conduct ourselves with integrity, just like, in all aspects of life. But here we're just talking about 340B. So today it's a follow-up to, I think it was episode 3, where I talked about an oversight program, which I'm just such a strong believer, as I just said, that the biggest thing that we can do to protect the 340B program is just to administer a compliant program. And I know the 340B world can be chaos. Like, it's crazy how much drama can exist in a drug pricing program. And we feel like we are out of control most of the times. Like, as a safety net provider participating in the 340B program, we are very vulnerable to everything that's been going on and often have very little control. But what we can control is the program that we administer. So that's why it's so important that we have a strong oversight process, that you know what's going on in your program, that you are doing things as compliantly as possible, and when you identify an issue, that you do the right thing. So that's what I want to talk about today. I just want to talk about following up on noncompliance, because let's be honest, unless you have like the smallest, most simple 340B program, you're going to find some noncompliance. Like, it's just complicated. Healthcare is complicated. Administering drugs, taking care of patients in these elaborate electronic medical platforms are just very complicated these days. So there's room for errors to happen, and it happens in all aspects of life. Like, errors happen, failures happen. What matters is how we act on that. So identifying noncompliance. I think that the biggest area to talk about here is dispensing prescriptions. That's probably just, probably the most common complaint from others in the industry is worrying about these prescriptions and if they're being, meeting patient definition, and if duplicate discounts are being prevented. So make sure, if you have any areas, settings where you are dispensing prescriptions utilizing 340B drug, that you have a mechanism to identify noncompliance in a contract pharmacy setting or in your hospital-owned pharmacy setting. You need to be reviewing prescriptions and making sure that you can validate that that prescription is related to care that happened at your organization. And if you identify a prescription that doesn't meet that requirement, so it doesn't meet patient definition, that prescription did not result from care provided from your entity, then what do? You need to be able to, we'll say, reverse that prescription. It's probably not reversing the prescription in the pharmacy sense. You are not going to take that prescription back and unbill it to the insurance and put it back on the shelf, but you want to remove it from your 340B program. So in a contract pharmacy setting or hospital-owned pharmacy setting, you are using, most of you at least, will be using some sort of third-party vendor to manage your prescriptions. There is a qualification process to determine that that prescription meets 340B eligibility requirements. So after that happens and you've had the opportunity to review the prescription, then what you would want to do if you identify that it doesn't meet the patient definition, then you would, again, I'm going to say reverse that prescription. You would either work with a representative from your vendor, or maybe there's just an automated process through the platform where you can ask for that prescription to be removed from your 340B program. So that prescription was dispensed, deemed eligible, and that drug accumulated for 340B replenishment. So ideally, you have a process to review these prescriptions before the replenishment occurs, but I know that that's not always feasible. So either before or after the replenishment has occurred, what you're going to want to do is make sure that that prescription can be removed and those accumulations adjusted to reflect that that prescription is no longer 340B eligible. And I should back up a little bit because I was, really just stressing the fact about it meeting patient definition, but the same exact goes for if you haven't prevented a duplicate discount. So if you are carving out Medicaid, which means that in the setting you want to make sure that you're not deeming any prescriptions billed to Medicaid as 340B eligible, but you determine that this prescription was deemed 340B eligible and it was billed to Medicaid, then you would want to do the same thing. You also want to make sure that you reverse that prescription, remove it from your 340B program, and those accumulations are adjusted. If the same goes if you carve in and you didn't bill it appropriately, like you didn't put the identifiers on the claim to notify Medicaid that you use 340B drug, then you want to, remove that prescription from your 340B program. Or if the timing is okay, like it hasn't been that much time and you can rebill the prescription with the appropriate modifiers, then that would also be a solution. So you just really want to make sure that you have a process in place, hopefully in a very timely manner. So let's say every 2 weeks or once a month that you are reviewing prescriptions, that you are able to identify ones that do not meet your eligibility requirements or that duplicate discounts, were not prevented, and that you would act on those and adjust them. So, if this is just like a fluid process for you, then it shouldn't be a huge deal. You shouldn't need to go to extenuating circumstances to correct it. Ideally, you can just remove the prescription from your program and move on. Those accumulations get adjusted. And even if it already was replenished, then as long as it's something that you're routinely using, a subsequent prescription should be able to offset that. If this is just, again, a fluid process, we're not talking about a large scale cleanup where, that offsetting is going to be, take a longer amount of time or be a larger quantity. If you have that process in place, then this should just be a normal course of business for you. If one thing you're also, I guess, going to want to be mindful of in this process is making sure that either if you're doing the job or your team members that are identifying these, why are these prescriptions not eligible? And why was it approved as 340B eligible if you're now deeming it isn't? Again, there are valid. I'm not going to get into any great details, but this happens. Like, even if everything is working as it should, then you may have, a prescription that the provider logged into the wrong place or something else that, everything worked as it should have, but that prescription should, just doesn't meet eligibility requirements. But something to keep in mind is making sure that there's not a systematic problem that's resulting in prescriptions being approved that shouldn't be. So that's an important part of the process, is understanding the scope of the noncompliance. Is it a one-off and you can understand why it was approved, or do you have a larger problem that you need to figure out and fix? Definitely an important part of the process. Now, if it is a larger, maybe a more systematic problem that you identify, then that's when, again, it gets a little bit more complicated. So first, you need to figure out what the problem is and you need to find out how to fix it. And maybe you can't do that alone. Maybe it's something in your, in your IT team needs help with, or your billing team needs help with. You need your third-party vendor to play a role. We need to understand how that's happening, who needs to participate in that corrective action plan, and then, get that implemented as quickly as possible. And then once you have it fixed going forward, what is the scope of that problem going back that you now need to address? and then how are you going to make good on that? So if you have a bulk of prescriptions or purchases that should not have occurred at 340B, that's when it's a little bit more complicated than just a one-off adjustment. So you need to understand, again, the full scope of that and what's the financial implications of it. So one thing I probably should have mentioned, and hopefully I mentioned this in a previous video, but in your policies and procedures, you should be defining what a material breach is with your institution, because that threshold that you set is going to be, when you have a larger scale non-compliance, if you exceed that material breach threshold, so let's say you set it at 5% of my annual 340B purchases. If your non-compliance is more than 5% of that, you exceed that material breach, then you are obligated to notify HRSA of your non-compliance. Now, if you have a non-compliance that does not meet that threshold, then your obligation is just to make good with the manufacturers that have been impacted by the non-compliance, which is basically, you want to, once you have all of that information, you would identify each of the impacted manufacturers and you would notify them that, you've identified this issue, you believe that you owe them a repayment of these 340B discounts that you should not have received due to this non-compliance. So that can be a bit of a process. And I will say there are third parties out there that can help with this. Apexis actually does have a solution that will help manage these manufacturer communications and repayments for a small fee, but you can do it yourself as well. So you would just, on the OPA database, you would find the manufacturer, they have the contact information. It's just like covered entities. There's a primary contact. That's a person that probably should be your first outreach to notify that, you've identified this non-compliance and you believe that you owe a repayment. There'll be some back and forth. They might have more questions. I think 99% of the time, they're going to want the invoice details for the 340B purchases that you're offering repayment on. And then, once you disclose that and offer the repayment and they may or may not accept it, then it would be, you've taken all of the steps that you need for that corrective action. And I talked about mostly the prescriptions, but this can happen in other areas. So it can happen in a hospital setting, an infusion setting. Like there certainly could be non-compliance that occurs in any setting that you're utilizing 340B drugs. So it's not limited to the outpatient pharmacy. I just know that that's an area that gets a lot of attention and it's probably the lowest hanging fruit in, making sure that everything is working appropriately. But yeah, just so important, not only that you have a great oversight program so that you are monitoring your activity and you know what's going on, but if and when you identify non-compliance, that you have a plan to act on that in an organized manner. Again, just to uphold the integrity of your program. Everybody makes mistakes. It's okay. It's how we act on them and how we, manage going forward is what really matters. So, just making sure that you have a plan for that non-compliance. And I think I'm going to wrap it up now. And I know I have some plans, so maybe for my next video, I will talk about, those manufacturer communications and how to, work through those disclosures and also how to handle when you get a good faith inquiry from manufacturers. So I will talk to you all soon. Thank you.